Don't ask me a question like that. I'm not biting. I refuse your question.
Why?
Because I refuse your question. I'm not your slave and you're not my master. Then you should talk to Jamie Foxx about that. And I think he's actually here, so you can.
Amid the glossy surface of Hollywood, a place wrapped in camera flashes and polite applause, there is one man who never blended into the crowd. His name is Quentin Tarantino, a filmmaker who doesn't believe in politeness and despises perfection. He makes movies the way a dying man writes a will, every frame, a declaration, every line, a blade, every cut, a sentence. Tarantino doesn't worship legends because most of them have forgotten what hunger feels like. He doesn't trust movie stars because their shine often blinds the story itself. And he loathes anyone who thinks they can adjust his script as if they were editing a news brief instead of cutting open his heart in front of the camera. In Tarantino's world, betrayal doesn't need a gun or a knife. It happens in silence, in a dark editing room, where your name is deleted from the credits without a word, without a chance to come back. From that moment on, you're no longer part of the film. You're a scar on Tarantino's career path. What follows are 8 men who once walked beside him through that doorway and were left behind. Not because they were weak, but because they forgot one truth. In Quentin Tarantino's universe, there is only one true star, and he's always behind the camera. Al Pacino, the pride Tarantino couldn't stand. When Al Pacino appeared in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood 2019, audiences called it a historic meeting, 2 eras of cinema colliding. On one side stood a living legend of the 1970s, a man who made acting as a form of soul, a creed. On the other, the renegade director of the 1990s, who turned cinema into a wild symphony of violence and pop culture. But behind the red carpet smiles that encounter was far from peaceful. Pacino played Marvin Schwartz, an aging agent with little screen time, but plenty of subtext. Tarantino wrote the character as an homage to the old gods of Hollywood, brief but unforgettable. Pacino, however, didn't see it that way. He arrived on set as the man who had carried the Godfather Serpico Scarface. He didn't believe in small but meaningful roles. For him, every line was a heartbeat. Every cut was a stolen piece of the soul. When Tarantino finished editing, Pacino realized that much of his work had vanished: the long monologues, the hesitant glances, even an entire exchange with Leonardo DiCaprio. He asked, "Why did you cut so many of my lines?" Tarantino's reply was blunt: "I cut for the audience to remember, not for the actor to feel satisfied." That answer ended the conversation and any chance of reunion. There was no shouting match, only 2 philosophies clashing in silence. Pacino was the loyal son of New Hollywood, the era that treated cinema as ritual, where actors lived and died with their characters. Tarantino was the child of the video store generation. For him, film was rhythm, dialogue was a beat, and everything could be remixed. Pacino acted so the character could exist. Tarantino edited so the audience could feel his own pulse. That difference turned every unset conversation into a quiet duel. Pacino remained polite, patient, yet his eyes betrayed irritation. The frustration of a man once called the greatest actor of the century, now being lectured by someone 4 decades younger about pacing. Tarantino, meanwhile, kept his distance, half admiring, half cold. He told his crew, "I want him in the movie. I just don't want him controlling it. When the film premiered, Pacino smiled for the cameras, shook hands, and spoke graciously to the press. But afterward, he never mentioned Tarantino again. No criticism, no gratitude, just the silence of a man who knew two mountains can't share the same sky. Tarantino, for his part, praised Leonardo DiCaprio, Brad Pitt, and Margot Robbie, but never once listed Pacino among the actors he hoped to work with again. He didn't hate Pacino the way he did Clooney or Willis, but he feared the energy Pacino carried, too powerful, too classic, too uncontrollable. Tarantino needed actors who served his rhythm, not gods who carried the entire past of Hollywood on their shoulders. They parted without drama, without noise. Just two legends, one who believed in the power of the spoken line, and one who believed in the power of the cut. Between them, there was no victor. Only the cold truth that in Tarantino's world, no one is allowed to be bigger than the film itself. If Al Pacino made Tarantino uneasy with the blazing pride of a still-burning legend, then another icon disappointed him in a different way, a man who in Tarantino's eyes had long since let his creative fire burn out. Robert De Niro, when a legend was called a dying flame by Quentin Tarantino. If Tarantino was Hollywood's new rebel, the man who wielded violence, pop music, and dialogue like weapons, then Robert De Niro was its actor of God, the man who silenced the world in Taxi Driver, The Godfather Part 2. Raging Bull, two icons, two eras and two egos that could never share the same frame for too long. Jackie Brown set summer 1997. Quentin Tarantino paced around the camera, muttering lines under his breath, hands slicing through the air like a conductor. In front of him, Robert De Niro stood still, blank stare, cigarette unlit between his fingers. The scene began. 1 second, 2 seconds, then Tarantino shouted, "Cut!" Not because it was wrong, but because it lacked rhythm. The air tightened. De Niro lifted his head and asked coolly, "Something wrong?" Tarantino didn't answer. He just stared at him. In those eyes, the madman of Taxi Driver was gone, replaced by a man just finishing another day's work. At that moment, Tarantino understood the man before him was no longer hungry. De Niro belonged to the 1970s, when cinema was religion and actors were its priests. He once lost 30 pounds for a role, threw real punches, drank real liquor, and lived his characters. But by the late 1990s, the fire had faded. He acted with surgical precision, professional, yet soulless. To Tarantino, a man who believed art demanded combustion, that was an unforgivable sin. The crew fell silent as Tarantino approached him. No shouting, no explanations, just a quiet instruction. "Let's try it again. But this time, make it dirtier." De Niro shrugged. He didn't believe in dirty. He believed in discipline. He was the product of New Hollywood. Tarantino was the child of the video store, raised on pulp violence, pop music, and scratched Italian film reels. Between them lay a gulf wide as two religions. Days later, Tarantino began avoiding De Niro's eyes. He filmed Samuel L. Jackson's scenes with visible excitement. But whenever De Niro stepped in front of the camera, his tone turned cold, mechanical, eager to wrap it up. De Niro's final scenes were shortened. Many takes vanished from the final cut. When the film premiered, Tarantino praised the cast, all except one. Everyone in the industry knew why. Tarantino couldn't stand how De Niro carried himself on set, silent, regal, flawless, but detached. He despised stars who were full calm, confident that fame could replace fire. Tarantino didn't want kings. He wanted mercenaries, not perfection passion. After Jackie Brown, they never worked together again. De Niro kept acting, collecting awards, standing on podiums. Tarantino kept searching for the hungry, the ones willing to bleed sweat and scream for a shot. He never spoke De Niro's name again, but friends said that when asked about Jackie Brown, Tarantino would only shrug. It's a good movie, but it's not hot. Perhaps to him, Robert De Niro was no longer the blazing fire of Taxi Driver, but the dying ember of a past era, something he both revered and resented. In Tarantino's world, everything cold must be cut. He didn't hate De Niro for being bad. He hated him for embodying what Tarantino feared most: comfort, pride, and that quiet moment when an artist stops risking everything and becomes a monument. In Tarantino's world, that isn't glory. It's a slow death. If Robert De Niro disappointed Tarantino with the cold ashes of a once blazing fire, then another industry veteran enraged him. For an even worse reason, he didn't just cool down Tarantino's work, he stole its soul. Oliver Stone, the man who killed Tarantino's script. Hollywood, early 1990s. Quentin Tarantino was still an unknown video store clerk in Los Angeles, scribbling screenplays between rental shifts. On his desk lay Natural Born Killers, a chaotic, violent, and satirical script about two lovers turned media-made murder idols. It was more than a story. It was Tarantino's manifesto. The media doesn't report violence, it feeds it. Then the script fell into the hands of Oliver Stone, the Oscar-winning director of Platoon, and Born on the 4th of July. Stone was a titan of 1970s New Hollywood, a generation that saw film as a moral battlefield art with duty conscience ideology. And that kind of seriousness was exactly what Tarantino despised. When Stone decided to buy Natural Born Killers, Tarantino assumed he'd preserve its manic MTV tempo tone, a pop-fueled blood opera. But Stone saw no poetry in the carnage. He saw only a tool for political commentary. He tore the script apart and rewrote nearly everything. Tarantino's pop culture banter was replaced with philosophical monologues. The violence was filmed through manic lenses, edited like a fever dream. When the film debuted in 1994, it was unrecognizable, acclaimed controversial, but to Tarantino, mutilated. He told one interviewer flatly, "He killed my script." The quote sliced through Hollywood like a blade. It wasn't just anger. It was humiliation, the fury of a man whose voice had been stolen. Oliver Stone, ever the combat veteran, fired back Tarantino's a kid with a toy gun. He doesn't understand reality. From then on, the divide was public. Stone saw Tarantino as the emblem of an irresponsible generation filmmakers who scavenged pop culture and turned it into shallow entertainment. Tarantino saw Stone as a fossil of a self-righteous era, a man who hid blood under philosophy and romanticized war. Both were right, and both hated each other for it. For years, they avoided each other entirely. If Stone appeared at a festival Tarantino refused to attend. When asked in an interview about the influence of American directors, Tarantino listed Scorsese, De Palma Coppola, then paused. Oliver Stone. I don't watch his movies anymore. A statement as cold as a sentence. Their feud wasn't just professional, it was generational. Stone came from war, death, and moral struggle. Tarantino came from VHS soul music and stylized make-believe. Between those worlds, peace was impossible. Years later, at a panel, someone asked Tarantino if he'd ever collaborate with Oliver Stone again. He smiled slightly, looked straight into the camera, and said, "No. I don't work with people who killed my first child." A short sentence, a life sentence. To this day, natural-born killers remains a wound that never healed, a film born from Tarantino's pen, but raised by Oliver Stone in a way its creator loathed. If Oliver Stone enraged Tarantino by distorting his work on paper, then another name terrified him even more, because this time, the nightmare didn't stay in the script. It walked straight into real life. Lawrence Tierney, when a hero became Quentin Tarantino's nightmare. Before Quentin Tarantino became famous for blood on screen, he faced a man who brought real violence to the set, Lawrence Tierney. The man Tarantino had idolized since childhood would become his first true nightmare in filmmaking. Tierney had been a Hollywood star in the 1950s square jaw, knife-sharp eyes, a voice roughened by prison cigarettes. He didn't act dangerous. He was dangerous. When young Tarantino watched Dillinger, 1945, Tierney was the perfect embodiment of the hard, cold, fearless man. So when Reservoir Dogs began filming in 1991, the 29-year-old director thought he was living a dream, directing his childhood idol. Days later, that dream turned into hell. Tierney showed up in a wrinkled suit with bloodshot eyes and a stormy temper. He didn't read the script, ignored direction, and couldn't remember his co-stars' names. Every time Tarantino offered feedback, he'd glare and snap, "You direct. I act. Don't tell me how to live." The crew quickly realized they were working with a live grenade. Michael Madsen, Tarantino's close friend, later said every day on set was a gamble. You never knew if he'd act or explode. Tierney cursed, assistants slammed tables, threw chairs, and once nearly hit a lighting guy because the lamp hit his bad angle. Tarantino, young, nervous, untested, now had to face a man twice his age, twice his fame, and 10 times his fury. The breaking point came during a late-night shoot. Tierney forgot his lines. Tarantino tried to remind him. The old man smirked. "Kid, what the hell do you know about acting silence?" Tarantino stared for 3 seconds, then said the words no one would ever forget, "Lawrence, you're fired. Right now. No shouting, no brawl, just silence, the kind that cuts deeper than any scream." Everyone knew this was Tarantino's first execution as a director. Years later, when asked about Tierney, Tarantino only sighed. Working with him was like living with a relative going through withdrawal. No hatred, no insults, just exhaustion, the kind that comes from staring into the real darkness of old Hollywood. Though Reservoir Dogs became a masterpiece, Tarantino never mentioned Tierney again. No tributes, no praise. He erased the man from his retrospectives as if burying the memory with the film reel itself. As for Tierney, once a symbol of hard-boiled masculinity, he disappeared from the industry. After that living alone, Poor remembered only as the man who almost made Tarantino quit directing. Tarantino worshipped intensity in cinema, but he never forgave chaos in real life. To him, violence only belonged on paper. Real violence had one fate to be cut. And so Lawrence Tierney, the last beast of old Hollywood, became the first victim of Tarantino's editing scissors. If Lawrence Tierney was the man who made Tarantino deliver his first on-set cut, then the next one was a different kind of wound, someone he didn't need to cut out, but quietly let slip from his life. Harvey Keitel, the Godfather, to Tarantino forgot. If there was ever one man who believed in Quentin Tarantino when all of Hollywood turned its back, it was Harvey Keitel. Before Pulp Fiction made Tarantino a global phenomenon, Keitel was the one who opened the first door, the man who helped a video store clerk step into the real world of cinema. In 1991, Tarantino carried the script for Reservoir Dogs all over Los Angeles. No one believed that an unknown kid with no credits could create such a blood-soaked, dialogue-driven crime story. Then the script landed in the hands of Harvey Keitel, the star of Mean Streets and Taxi Driver. Keitel didn't just read it, he bet his name on it. He invested money, made phone calls, and rallied producers from New York to help turn this nobody's dream into a film. On set, Keitel wasn't just an actor. He was a mentor. He taught Tarantino how to find rhythm behind the camera, how to talk to actors, and even helped diffuse tempers when tough guys like Michael Madsen or Lawrence Tierney pushed the crew to its breaking point. The young Tarantino, only 29, called him the Godfather, not for a role, but because he truly was the godfather of his career. But Hollywood has a cruel rule: once the child can fly, it never looks back. After Pulp Fiction, 1994, Tarantino became the new messiah of modern cinema. Everyone wanted to work with him. Bruce Willis, John Travolta, Robert De Niro, and Harvey Keitel, the man who stood beside him at the start, quietly disappeared from his scripts. No fight, no anger, just the absence of a name in the new call sheets. Keitel saw it coming. In one quiet interview, he said with a faint smile, "When he no longer needed me, he disappeared." A short sentence, but it cuts like a blade. Tarantino never denied it. In another conversation, he simply said, "I don't keep people. I keep rhythm." It sounded professional, but for Keitel, it was the end of something built on loyalty. It was never about money or fame. Keitel came from New Hollywood, a generation that believed cinema was personal, that loyalty mattered as much as talent. Tarantino, however, saw filmmaking as a laboratory and actors as ingredients. Once the rhythm changed, so did the recipe. Years later, when Tarantino made Inglourious Basterds or Django Unchained, people asked why he never brought Keitel back, not even for a cameo. Tarantino only shook his head. No comment. Keitel, still working steadily, never mentioned Quentin again. No resentment, no nostalgia, just a strange silence between two men who once shared the same dream. In Tarantino's universe, there's no room for sentimentality. Once a scene is wrapped, everything, even the person who helped him start rolling, can be cut. Harvey Keitel understood that earlier than anyone. Perhaps he was the first to realize that in Tarantino's cinema, even a godfather has an expiration date. After parting ways with Harvey Keitel, the man who had once guided him through the dark, Tarantino entered a new phase. He no longer sought mentors. He sought equals. And that was when he met one of Hollywood's biggest action icons, a man who seemed born for Tarantino's world, until both realized on a Tarantino set there's only room for one man in charge. Bruce Willis, when the man Tarantino saved became the flame that burned out in his eyes. When Pulp Fiction began filming in 1993, Bruce Willis was at the lowest point of his career. He had once been America's ultimate action hero. Die Hard, the last Boy Scout, tough, cool, rich, unstoppable. But by the early 90s, his fame had collapsed. Box office bombs piled up. Audiences were tired of the one-note hero. Tarantino, fresh off Reservoir Dogs, did what no one else dared. He bet on a falling star. The role of Butch Coolidge, a gruff, quiet, worn-out boxer, was written as if for Willis himself. A man who'd once stood on top of the world, now fighting one last round to keep his soul. Tarantino saw in Willis what he worshipped most: hunger inside a broken shell. But the moment cameras rolled, that belief began to crack. Willis arrived like a seasoned soldier, professional, but rigid. He tweaked lines, changed gestures, improvised looks, the same habits that had made him a star. But for Tarantino, whose scripts were sacred text, such improvisation was blasphemy. The set became a tension chamber. Every time a Willis changed the rhythm of a line, Tarantino stopped the camera. Every time Tarantino corrected a move, Willis clenched his jaw. Crew members later said working between them felt like sitting next to a ticking bomb. Tarantino didn't shout or slam things. He just stared, the kind of silence heavier than rage. When Pulp Fiction was released, it became a phenomenon. Willis was hailed as reborn. Tarantino was crowned the savior of Hollywood. But between them, there were no hugs, no thank yous, only distance. Tarantino praised Travolta, Uma Thurman, Samuel L. Jackson, but never Willis. He called Pulp Fiction a film made by actors who understood rhythm, a thinly veiled message Willis did not. To Tarantino, Willis represented everything he despised to Hollywood. A man who knew how to shine, but not how to surrender. He was the star of a bygone era, not the heartbeat of a scene. And in Tarantino's world, where every line of dialogue is a pulse, and every camera moves a heartbeat, anyone out of rhythm gets cut. They never reunited. Tarantino went on to build his cinematic universe. Willis chased redemption through other action films. But to Tarantino, that name remained on his unseen list, the list of those already cut. Not out of hatred, but because Tarantino loathed safety. He loathed the confident smile of those who thought they could never be wrong. And Bruce Willis, though once saved by him, eventually became the very thing Tarantino feared most, a legend who no longer burned. If the clash with Bruce Willis was about control on set, then the next story was about something even worse. The kind of betrayal that didn't happen under bright lights, but through a single phone call. James Woods, when a missed call erased a legend from Tarantino's world. Hollywood, early 1990s. Quentin Tarantino was still a hungry young screenwriter, living on coffee cigarettes and VHS tapes. On his desk lay Reservoir Dogs, a simple crime story written with raw, manic, almost violent energy. But Tarantino needed a face to give it weight, a name big enough to make people believe in him. And the first name that came to mind was James Woods. At that time, Woods was hardly an unknown. He had carved out a reputation through smart, intense films like Videodrome and Salvador, the kind of actor whose sharp eyes and razor-edged intelligence made every line feel dangerous. To Tarantino, he was perfect, powerful, unpredictable, and just a little insane. Exactly the DNA of the world he wanted to create. Tarantino sent the script. Woods read it and liked it, but everything fell apart over a single number. Woods' agent called Tarantino back and said, "He's interested, but the offer's too low." Tarantino froze. The budget for Reservoir Dogs was microscopic, a true indie film. But to him, this wasn't about money. It was a test. In Tarantino's mind, anyone who joined his world had to be ready to bleed for it not to negotiate like it was a business deal. And when Woods, a man he admired, let his agent put a price tag on the role, Tarantino saw it as betrayal. Without hesitation, he crossed Woods' name off the list. Instantly. No negotiation, no waiting. A few days later, Woods found out and called back. Tarantino answered only to say, "You just missed the only chance of your life." Then he hung up. Cold, clean, final. Woods later recalled in an interview, "I called to apologize, but he never picked up again." Woods accused him of being disrespectful to his elders. Tarantino said nothing, the kind of silence that means deletion. When Reservoir Dogs premiered in 1992, it became an indie revolution, turning Tarantino from a video store clerk into Hollywood's most sought-after new director. Woods saw it happen, and he knew Tarantino had been right. That was the chance. Years passed. Pulp Fiction, Kill Bill, Inglourious Bastards, and James Woods' name never appeared in Tarantino's credits again. No cameo, no invitation, no mention. Tarantino didn't feud. He simply did what he did best: he cut. People in the industry said Woods tried to reconcile, sent letters, greetings, even mutual friends. But Tarantino's memory, when it came to those who betrayed art for money, was made of steel. To him, an actor could be difficult, arrogant, volatile, but if they ever chose money over the role, that was it. Woods admitted years later, "I still think Tarantino's a genius, but he holds grudges like they're sacred. To him, every wrong decision is a death sentence." He was right. In Tarantino's world, emotions are absolute love or hate, trust or erase. There's no in-between and no way back. And James Woods, the man who almost joined Reservoir Dogs, became living proof of that rule in the Tarantino universe. One missed call can make you disappear forever. If with James Woods, Tarantino learned that betrayal doesn't need to be loud, that sometimes it's just bad timing. Then his next clash wasn't about money or silence at all. It was about something far more offensive to Tarantino perfection. George Clooney, when Tarantino couldn't stand the shine. In 1996, George Clooney had just stepped out of television stardom. He was America's favorite face, thanks to ER, the charming doctor with perfect hair, an effortless smile, and eyes that could heal or seduce. To Hollywood, Clooney was a safe bet, marketable, likable, bankable. But Clooney didn't want safe. He wanted chaos. He wanted to burn down the clean image that TV had built for him. And so, he turned to Quentin Tarantino. At that moment, Tarantino was at his peak. After Pulp Fiction, the high priest of dirty cinema, where blood, cigarettes, and soul music mixed like sacred ritual. Clooney wanted to prove he could survive in that world. Tarantino, ever the experimenter, agreed to test him. The result was From Dusk Till Dawn, a bizarre hybrid of crime and vampire horror, a mashup of Bonnie and Clyde meets Dracula. On paper, it was a dream collaboration. The most handsome man in Hollywood meets its most dangerous mind. But on set, light and darkness refused to merge. Clooney acted with precision. Perfect marks, perfect lighting, perfect rhythm. He checked the camera angles, adjusted posture, and delivered every line clean. He entered each scene like a model stepping onto a runway, composed, confident, in control. To Tarantino, that was a sin. He wanted it dirtier, messier, alive. Clooney believed in professionalism. Tarantino believed in chaos with purpose. After a few days, Tarantino began to lose patience. He told a crew member quietly, "He's too clean, like he's going to kill someone, but still wearing cologne." The comment spread through the set. Tarantino never said it to Clooney's face. He didn't have to. Everyone knew what he meant. Clooney was too Hollywood, too polished, too in command, too beloved to ever feel dangerous. In the film's final scene, Clooney driving away from a wasteland of corpses and blood, Tarantino wanted a cold, feral look, something dead behind the eyes. Clooney, in his own way, gave a softer gaze, tired, melancholic, almost beautiful. Tarantino watched the monitor and sighed. Beautiful isn't what I need. From Dusk Till Dawn premiered to massive success. Audiences adored Clooney. The TV star had finally become a movie icon. Tarantino stayed silent. No congratulations, no praise, no mention of Clooney in interviews. When later asked about the film, he simply said George Clooney is not a movie star. No metaphor, no diplomacy, just a punch. To Tarantino, a movie star wasn't someone loved by millions. It was someone who made the audience afraid of them. Clooney had everything fame, looks, charm, but lacked the one thing Tarantino worshipped above all else: danger. From then on, silence stretched for decades. No reunion, no cameo, no acknowledgement. Tarantino kept working with his film family, Samuel L. Jackson, Uma Thurman, Michael Madsen, actors who bled to his rhythm. Clooney, meanwhile, became a director, producer, activist, a Hollywood titan in his own right. But in Tarantino's world, that door stayed closed, maybe forever. They were once stars, the very soul of old Hollywood, where morality, power, and fame coexisted behind a single smile. But in Quentin Tarantino's universe, there is no room for such things. Their only three forces reign: blood, the script, and absolute obedience. George Clooney brought charm. Tarantino saw artifice. Bruce Willis brought heroism. Tarantino saw defiance. Lawrence Tierney brought real menace, but it was too real to control. Oliver Stone brought ideology. Tarantino called it betrayal. De Niro, Pacino. Woods, Keitel. The icons who once built Hollywood itself were one by one erased, as if they were outdated reels trimmed from the final cut. Because to Tarantino, cinema isn't a shrine for legends, it's a battlefield. And there can only be one true author. If you refuse your role in his story, he will rewrite it and write you out. You might have once been the brightest star of your era, but in Tarantino's world, every star eventually burns out, because the only light allowed to shine was his. So, what do you think of Quentin Tarantino's world, where loyalty has an expiration date and one small mistake can erase you from the frame forever? Which of these names do you think deserved forgiveness, and which truly earned their fate of being cut from the Tarantino universe? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more hidden stories behind Hollywood's brightest lights, where even legends can be deleted from the film with a single click from the most powerful director alive.